Pops in a pod. Pops in a pod.
The fact that we can have a mother with shades of gray. We have had all kinds of relatives, we have all kinds of relationships with shades of gray. You have shades of gray in your love, romantic relationships, or with your siblings, or, we have had people who have had these some kind of conflicting feelings towards their parents. But you never have a mother who has any kind of ambivalence towards the child or towards the feeling of being a mother. So, but now that's changing, in popular culture. You are talking about it, there are representations of it.
That was Zehra Naqvi, a mother of a 10-year-old boy. Zehra is an author, journalist, and columnist. She recently released her memoir, The Reluctant Mother, a story no one wants to tell.
We read her book and were really moved by her experience. On this Mother's Day special episode, here's our chat with her about her experience as a mother and a partner.
Before we dive into the chat, a fair warning. The recording is not exactly up to our usual standards. The technology was not really kind to us today, but it's a compelling conversation nonetheless. Here's our chat with Zehra.
Hi Zehra, welcome to Pops in a Pod.
Hi, Peter. Hi, Nadir.
Nadir and I were talking in the introduction, and this is a Mother's Day special episode, right? And one of the things Nadir and I keep talking while there's so much information that mothers are putting out, it's a lot of it, I believe, and this is again my personal opinion, that a lot of it is romanticized, right? Like you'd have a lot of information which is again goes through not only just Instagram filters but multiple filters before they actually reach social media. So that's why when we went through your book, it was such a contrast but also a refreshing take on motherhood.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, that was the intention behind it, to talk about the truth that often people are not allowed to talk about, which is hence the title, a story no one wants to tell. So, yeah.
So when you did eventually end up publishing the book, and because it's such a stark contrast to the way information flows when it comes to parenting, especially from a mom's perspective, what was the kind of response that you received from your readers, or generally people who analyzed your book or maybe critiqued your book, or what were your initial reactions that you received?
So, as far as the readers are concerned, the response has been overwhelming. And the word is overwhelming. So, not a day goes by that I don't get a message from a woman, a reader, saying that, how much she has been able to relate to the book and how much it has helped her to accept herself. There was this message from a woman who said that she'd been on my Facebook friend list, and though she didn't know me, she said that she actually read the book and she felt so connected. And these are her words, that I used to feel guilty about not being the motherly, quote unquote, the motherly mom, and her family members often used to say to her that you're just doing it as a responsibility. You're not the kind of mother that mothers should be, as if there is a kind of mother that you should be. And this lady, she wrote to me that after I read your book, I felt an acceptance of myself for who I am, as not just as a mother but as a woman, as a person. So those are the kind of messages I keep getting, and there's been overwhelmingly loved by readers, and I hadn't expected that kind of response. So yeah, and everybody says that we want to talk about these things, but there's so much judgment from society. The kind of a binary of good mom, bad mom. Like you have the good cop, bad cop. So you have the good mom, bad mom, and nobody wants to be the bad mom. I had a lady at one of my book signings at Bahari Sons. I had a lady who came for the signing, and she said, I could have got the book at Amazon, but I wanted to specifically meet you and tell you that this is the book that I have been waiting for the last 20 years. So her son is 20 years old now. And she said, I wish someone had written this book 20 years ago, but I'm glad that at least it's out there now. I've been waiting for this book for 2 decades. So that's amazing. You just don't expect that kind of thing.
Wow. Now I truly understand what you meant by overwhelming. But I just want to go back to something that you said in terms of guilt, right? And while one lady came back to you, I'm pretty sure like there's a lot of other women who haven't directly reached out to you who could totally relate to that guilt.
Yeah.
And that's something that Nader and I keep talking, we've spoken in the past about, right? That unfortunately, and we're using a platform like Mother's Day to talk about it, but a lot of the guilt is put upon the mother, right? And we see it very differently. That's why we do a podcast called Pops in a Pod. And there are times, like, I have to admit, right, like, as dads we feel guilty also. Are we doing enough? Are we like the good dads, as you say, right? Good dad, bad dad, similar to good mom, bad mom.
Yeah, and it's usually self-imposed.
Yeah.
You don't even have to wait for anyone from outside to tell you that. It's usually self-imposed, and that's why you have this term that so many people are talking about, which is mom guilt, right?
Yeah. So, no, maybe it is self-imposed to a certain extent, but it's also very much socially imposed. You have a whole, plethora of relatives. I don't even know what is the collective noun for relatives. There should be a proper collective nouns, like you've got a pack of hyenas and a pride of lions. There should be a collective noun for relatives. So the entire pride of relatives descends upon you and tells you as to how your son or your daughter or whatever. I have a son, so the son thing comes instinctively. So how your child is not well fed enough, and you're not feeding the child enough, and the child is not doing well enough
Oh
at
boy.
school somehow. Or maybe if the
Totally get
child is
it.
maybe if the child is introverted, then you're not making the child extrovert enough. Or if the child is extrovert, then you're not making the child courteous and polite enough. I mean, it's you can't win no matter which side you're on. So
Yeah.
I maybe it is self-imposed, but for me, I would say no, it's not just self-imposed. It's very much socially imposed by the pride of relatives.
It's interesting that you say that, right? Because, and again, I'm going to put this down to culture also, because
Hmm.
a lot of times in India, we are still like, while nuclear families are on the rise and we read about it, but we're still like joint at the hip to our families, so to say. Like, you always are not too far away from your family,
Hmm.
right? I mean, it's not like, say, in certain countries where you actually are far away and you only see your families on Easter or Christmas, right? That's the only time, or certain occasions. uh, but I just want to understand from your perspective, right? And just kind of seeing, do you think, because you've written the book about your experience, and this was 10 odd years ago, have you seen anything change since then, or do you think it's got worse, bad, from your experience, just as a third person now, as an observer?
I think that it's always been there. It's not something new. It's always been there on mothers. But what has changed over the last 1 decade is that we are now sitting here, and on a podcast, we're talking about it on a public platform. So 10 years ago, the reason I just started blogging about this was I felt like a freak. I wanted to know that there was someone else, one person who felt the same way as I did. And even if there wasn't, I felt like, okay, even if I am just one freak in this whole wide world, okay, I do exist. So let me put my truth out there. And then when I started blogging about it, then I started, getting messages from women across India, across the world, saying that we're so glad you're writing this because it's exactly what we feel, but we can't talk about it. So now that we can talk about it, that's a huge change. That the fact that we are talking about it, the fact that we are having these conversations, the fact that we're not treating ambivalence on the part of a mother as something which is villainous. It's not, you're not a villain. The fact that we can have a mother with shades of gray. We have had all kinds of relatives. We have all kinds of relationships with shades of gray. You have shades of gray in your love romantic relationships, or with your siblings, or we have had people who have had these some kind of conflicting feelings towards their parents. But you never have a mother who has any kind of ambivalence towards the child, or towards the feeling of being a mother. So, but now that's changing. In popular culture, you are talking about it. There are representations of it. Like the other day, I was watching this film Shakuntala Devi. You heard of it, right? So they show her as a mother who's very ambitious, and she's not the very typical kind of mother that Bollywood shows. She's not the mother India types, right? So the fact that we are actually accepting that these kind of feelings are normal for mothers, or that these kind of mothers also exist without typecasting them as the villain, is a huge change.
It's very interesting that you brought up two interesting aspects, right? One is the whole ambivalence of, mother, or rather what society thinks, that a mother has to be a model of a mother, right? A mother can't
Exactly.
go wrong.
Can't go
And
wrong.
then on the other end of the spectrum, you have, if father does something, like, oh my god, he's doing so much, right? So there's that one conversation going on. We are all aware of it. We've also kind of, been there, and I mean, not accepted, but we know it happens. The second part is very interesting, which you brought up, which is Bollywood, right? Which is, I think, films rather. There's a huge array of films that this country, loves, right? And let's face it, that's who we are as a people. And we also have a section within our podcast where we actually do a complete analysis of the parenting characters in those films or those shows, and are they close to reality, or are they just, whims and fancies of the writer and director? And I want to take this opportunity right now and pick up a quote directly from your book, right? And I quote, "I'm pregnant, I thought I was at peace. I had always seen in movies that women break into tears of joy and men swing their wives up in their arms on learning that they have new life coming. I do break into tears, but they are tears of shock, of dread, of dismay." Can you just walk us through that quote, right? Like, what was your feeling? What did you really go through when that came across?
So I was all of 24. And yeah, I married at the age of 23. I mentioned Bollywood because I think that I particularly, in particular myself, and also a lot of women of my generation have been totally ruined by Bollywood because we have led our lives believing somehow that this is what it's going to be like. Shah Rukh Khan and Kajol romancing each other. At least I totally lived my life according to those Bollywood fantasies. And me and my partner, we were in love, we got married, and we thought this was how it's going to be. We're going to be traveling and having dinner date. This is how it's going to be. This is how life is. This is how marriage is. So, and the thing is that it was like that for us. We were both, financially independent, and we were doing our stuff. He would go for his work, and I had my career, and we were living just the two of us. We weren't living in a joint family as the pack of relatives and stuff that as we were mentioning. So we were not having to deal with any of it, right? So, and then in the middle of it all, you're not prepared to be a mother. You're not ready to be a mother. What we had imagined was that we would sort of enjoy our life for a couple of years and stuff, and then we would be ready to take on that responsibility, because this I was very much aware of, that motherhood and parenthood is a huge responsibility. Bollywood notwithstanding, you see how your parents, you see kind of how your parents take care of you and how much they have to sacrifice for you. So you understand that parenthood involves all of that. And then when you're not prepared for it, and you have so many other things lined up and so many other dreams, and again, this is as I've written in the introduction to my book, is that the book was when the book was written, when I started writing the book, I was 25, 26 years old, and the emotions in it are those of a 24-year-old. So it's from that perspective of a really young person who has all these dreams about, her career taking off and her love life and all of that. So motherhood didn't fit into my scheme of things at that point of time. I wasn't ready for it. So to discover that this had happened and I wasn't ready, and I just started crying. I didn't know how to react. I just didn't know how to react, and I was suspecting, and that's how the book begins. No, that I'm suspecting that I am not able to eat, and I'm feeling dizzy, I'm feeling faint, and so there was a sort of build up to that. And who could I take it out on? Who could I take it on? Who do you take it out on when you're angry? Who do you take it out on? The person who's closest to you, because that's the person you can fight with. So yeah, I inevitably ended up taking it out on my partner and screaming at him and getting angry and then crying in his arms, as it happens. So yeah, I mean, it's also the age factor. Women who become mothers later in life and they're more ready for it, they have a different experience compared to women who are very young.
That's a very interesting point you made, Zehra, right? And you would think that, when you have all these books and all these people who are giving these, pregnancy classes and stuff like that, that motherhood or fatherhood is just going to be smooth, right? Or just going to be like what you hear. But when we were reading about your experience, it just kind of brought to mind what somebody said, right? Is that each person's parenting journey is unique. Uh, One of the reasons why actually Nader and I started the podcast was because we realized that for dads there wasn't no reference, right? I mean, when I became a dad 5 years ago, my wife gave me what to expect when you're expecting, and I was like, come on, like this is a book which is, I don't know, written when is going to be my reference. So I just wanted to go back, right? When you're talking about being a young mother, right? You were 24. Uh, what was the kind of references that you had for motherhood uh, back then, right? Like some of your friends, uh, other than Bollywood, of course, which we've already talked about, but books and things like that.
Well, it wasn't a part of the plan. I was not even thinking about it. It was like we'll get to that part when we get to it. We'll think about it. We'll cross the bridge when we get to it. But we just suddenly the bridge came to us very unexpectedly. So the references that I had were just my own mother, my grandmother, the women in the family, the women that we'd seen, and mostly we hadn't seen them having a very much of a life outside of their children. It's like a mother's life is totally centered on the kids. And I was a very, and I'm still a very ambitious person, and I didn't have any references of a lot of ambitious women around me. So it was basically like just scripting your own story without having anything to fall back upon, because the kind of role models we have, and I'm from a small town, and I've mentioned that in the book. So the kind of role models that small town women have for motherhood are the kind of women who, for whom motherhood is the be all and end all of life. It's like everything. And even again, I would refer to the media as that, because I used to feel angry. Honestly, I used to feel annoyed when I used to see these uh, ads in which the mother is saying, oh, motherhood is the best thing, my baby is the best thing that happened to me. And it was all I could do to not throw the remote at the television and say, shut up. you know it's like just so sugar coated. That's not how it is. And I had, at the time that I was expecting, so one of my husband's cousins, she had just had a baby, and we were, at least I was watching how it was for her, how much she has had to struggle. And and again, in my book I've written about it. I did not have any kind of fancy notions about motherhood at all. And I had heard all those stories. And again, this cousin, her, one of the other cousins' anniversary dinners were, ruined. I've written that in the book, if you remember. So I was seeing screaming and tantrum throwing kids all around me. So I had no fancy notions about motherhood at all. In fact, if at all, I was way more apprehensive than I should have been at that age. So yeah, I mean, because again, as I said, I was an ambitious person, and I had to fight a lot to get where I was, to get to the big city, be a journalist, do things that I wanted to. And being a journalist involves late night timings and all those kinds of things that had no precedent in our families. Girls from these respectable Khandani families did not do all these kinds of things in the small towns like Aligarh. So to get to a place where you had to really fight for it, and you had no roadmap in your immediate surroundings other than the stories of inspiring women that you read in books, which certainly did not factor in motherhood at all.
It's very very interesting point you brought up, and we started the episode by saying that how parenting, especially from a motherhood standpoint, is airbrushed. I'll take this opportunity again to go back to one of your quotes from the book, since you spoke about ambition and how you are want to write, and you've done so much work, right? And there's this very poignant point that you make, which is, and I quote, when I had to let go of my job around the time that I was 3 months pregnant, it took a pretty big toll on my mental well being. No, end quote. Not something that people would be readily talking about, but here you are, you wear it as a badge of honor that, yeah, I did get pregnant. Yes, it's not planned, but it's clearly had an effect on my professional life. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
So when I discovered that I was expecting, after the initial, crying and all the drama, and we do have a flair for drama, I guess. So After that happened, I realized that there were women in my office and they were having babies and, keep working till the 8th month and they have their baby and they come back. So I had to tell myself, look, it's not the end of the world. It's going to be fine. It's not the end of the world. But then suddenly the world started ending for me, so to say. I had all these huge pregnancy migraines. I had extreme debilitating weakness. I was throwing up. You hear about morning sickness. I had 24-hour sickness. I was every say half an hour in my office. I was rushing to the washroom to throw up. Half an hour, 60 minutes, like that. And I was just, and I've written about all of these things in my book also, that I was feeling drowsy all the time. I couldn't write, I couldn't think, and my mind went numb, and all of that was happening. So but pretty much by the time I got to the 3rd month, I realized I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't get out of bed. If someone was ringing the doorbell, I had to crawl to the door. That was the level of weakness I had. And apparently I was one of those rare cases of women who are suffering so much in their pregnancy. A lot of women don't experience that, but some do. And even those experiences should be talked about. Why should we not talk about them? So it was a huge blow to me, to lose, to have to quit my job at that particular point of time. And when you're also ill, and then there's no one around. And again, these are things that I've clearly written in my book, that having a job or being in a profession that you love is also, it gives you a peer group, right? It gives you people that you can talk to. You've got friends, you go there every day, you have these discussions, and you have all kinds of office parties and whatever, you're hanging out and you're having fun. But when you're suddenly at home and you're alone, and that puts a lot of pressure on your spouse to constantly be your companion, and he also has professional commitments and things like that. So it's a very lonely place to be. So it was a huge blow to me to have to leave my job. Yeah, it was very important. As I said, I had to fight with my family to get there, to get to that position, and suddenly, boom, it's all taken away.
Yeah, and I can not even imagine 1% of that, because my wife was one of those who didn't have that much of sickness post the first trimester, right? And even that was really tough, because I was just like, what, we can't go to the our favorite restaurant and eat, or we can't do that, like, that was the thing, right? And so I totally understand the part you're talking about, like, enjoying that companionship in there. One aspect also you've talked about the book is just being away from your husband, right? And I'm trying to like imagine a 25-year-old and going back to me being 25. That would have been also pretty hard, right? And
Oh, that was
especially,
really tough.
yeah, talk to us about like how you kind of came through that, because again, in that moment it seems like the entire world's crashing, the world's against you. But like when you look back at it now, what do you think kind of helped you with that?
So I think that before I talk about the separation, I need to talk about the reasons for separation. And again, this is something that you are not supposed to talk about. You're not supposed to talk about financial problems. You are never supposed to say in public that there you could have some financial issues. And these are not things that anybody tells you, that you when you have a kid, you will have to deal with money as a problem. Because when both of you are earning and you're spending as much as you like, and you don't even think about so much about the future at that age, you're just earning and spending and having fun. And then suddenly one of you is not earning, and then there's a third person, and the expenses are skyrocketing. So nobody tells you about these things, nobody prepares you for these things. And particularly growing up in a culture where everything is attributed to God, go ahead, God is going to take care of everything.
I I'm so glad you said it and not me, because oh, Bhagwan dekhega, right?
Right,
Like you just put your hope and everything else that it'll be taken care of,
right, I mean,
and that
yeah.
can give you like a real false sense of security, right?
No, seriously, I mean, God helps those who help themselves. That should be the one that we talk about. So yeah, to be in a culture that totally says, oh, go ahead, have kids, God's going to bring the money. I don't know. Yeah, we didn't get any money coming to us from the heavens. We had to go out and earn it. So that's exactly what happened. And then my husband, he got an offer from abroad, he had to go abroad, and we hadn't imagined that it would lead to a separation. What he had been told was that 2 months, 4 months tops, he would get his family there. He would be able to bring his family there. That was his first and foremost condition, because we didn't want to be away from each other. We were anyway earning money here, and we would have been able to earn more. So it's not like it was something we were not in dire straits that we had to be away from each other. But then it didn't happen like that, and that was again an important life lesson learned, and learned at a really high cost, that not everyone who's promising you things is actually going to fulfill those promises, even if it's someone really close to you. And so what happened is that my husband had to, he applied for that job, and his visa was supposed to come within a month or so, and then he we would say take 6 months, and I would be there. So, and then things just happened like that. And the one who we had a the landlady whose house we lived in, she wanted us to vacate the house because her daughter had come from abroad and she had to stay, and all of those things are happening. So instead of looking for another house there, we thought, okay, I'll just go back to Aligarh, stay with my parents for a while. It's just a matter of a few months. Why to just set up another, take another house and set up again, and I'll be alone in any case. If he's not here, then I'll have to be alone. How will I take care of the baby? So but then I went home, and then he stayed in Delhi, and he would come on the weekends. And so basically all the things that I wanted in my fantasy of Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, I had completely lost all of them. I lost my job, and for all practical purposes, I lost my husband. It became a weekend marriage. So my Bollywood fantasy totally fell apart.
My God.
And
If I may say, I think if we talk to anyone who grew up in India in the 90s, right? That movie was like the epitome of romance.
the
And
all and end all, absolutely. So that there you have this person who has all these kinds of filmy Bollywood dreams, and all of our dreams are getting demolished one by one. So for a young person, it's really difficult to cope with that. And then I was, for a year, it took a year for him to finally get his visa. And then when he went, we were really overjoyed. Okay, fine, this 1 year's gone by, and then we're going to be together. But then another year went by, and now he's in a different country and I'm in a different country, and we're not even seeing each other. I mean, the very little amount of time we had with each other over the weekends, even that was taken from us. And here I was. And the worst part of it is, again, because of being a part of the small town culture, is that nobody considers this to be something huge. It's normal. It's normal, and it happens a lot. And I've seen a lot of women who go through this. Their partners are living abroad, they come once a year. And for women from the lower socioeconomic strata, uh, I've met a woman whose husband used to come once in 3 years, and I can't even imagine what that would be like. What kind of a life is that? And to have people tell you that this is normal, this happens, men go out to earn money, women stay back and look after the kids. And my temper levels are going up to the extent that I want to punch that person's nose and tell him, how does that feel, buddy? This is normal, people get punched all the time. But the thing is that this kind of a denial of suffering. Why do we get married, and again, this whole question of what is the purpose of marriage. It's just procreation. It's just, you've got a baby. That's it. That's done. Now that you have a child, it's the be all and the end all. And even your partner should not matter. The career should not matter is one thing, because in the very holy pious scheme of things, women should not be materialistic, and they should not think about careers and money. But even in that holy and pious scheme of things, you should not even love your partner. I mean, how does that make sense? You should not want to be with him or her, whatever, you know from the man's perspective. Why should the man not want to be with his wife, or the woman that he loves? From both people, right? Why would you say to a woman that, bacche mein dil lagao, just focus on your child now? It's not a replacement. One person is not a replacement. One relationship is not a replacement for another. And it's also absurd, because you have a romantic relationship with your partner. It's not something you're going to have with your child, for heaven's sake. I mean, it makes no sense. So that kind of denial of your suffering, and not nobody understanding what you're going through, it's a very lonely place to be. Very lonely.
Thank you so much that you're sharing your most private moments with us, and we really do truly appreciate it. But I think our listeners should also be thankful that perhaps if they feel that they are in this journey alone, it's not the case, because I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people out there who probably are sort of facing these difficulties, these challenges, these periods of struggle. I wanted to ask you, considering you've spoken so much about the whole separation, um, what was how did your relationship during this period with your husband develop?
So there was this 1 month after my son was born when we were still in Delhi, and that was kind of the golden month of the three of us being together, and or me being able to witness my husband, burping the baby or putting him to bed or taking turns with, bathing the child. There is a joy in doing all of that together. When you have a child, the struggles notwithstanding, there is a great joy and pleasure in watching each other. You know take care of the child, right? So that there was that 1 month, and in spite of all the fatigue and the stress that I felt, I still felt happy that I had this man beside me, the person that I loved, and even if I am crying, at least I have him to cry with. But after that, I mean, the when you talk about the relationship developing, there was where and how would the relationship develop? It just turned into a long distance relationship. And with two people, a long distance relationship might still work. I mean, I don't know how do people make it work with a kid. I don't know that. People do make it work, but perhaps, well, I don't know. It's just up to every individual to define how they want to live their life. But I don't know how to make that work. And from the point of view of my husband, he still says, that I missed all my son's milestones. Right? I didn't see when he started walking, and I didn't see when he started talking. I just missed those milestones. So he missed 3 years, important years of his son growing up, and I missed all that joy and the pleasure that comes from having a child, and taking care of the child together. So it starts falling apart after a moment, after a point of time. It starts falling apart, and the distance grows, and you want it to remain the way that it was, but it's very difficult.
To a certain extent, I can relate to you because while I was doing my MBA, my wife and I were apart for a year,
Mm.
and like I was actually an hour and a half time difference. So you'd actually think it's not that bad, but it's rough. I mean,
It's
like I had realized when I was very young that long distance relationships are not a good thing for me. But
true.
yeah, I don't know. I think the amount of time I spent on Skype, and thank God for WhatsApp, right?
Yeah. And also, let me remind you that this was like 10 years ago. So, and when my husband went to Oman, there was no video calling available there, because that country, they block these international. They have no Skype, and all these. There were these apps at that time, Line and Viber, and all of that was in trend at that point of time, and there was nothing available. And WhatsApp did not have any video calls at that particular point of time, as far as I remember. Even WhatsApp was a new thing. I remember when my husband moved to Oman, he forced me to get a touch phone, because I refused to use touch phones. I said I can't handle them. And he was like, no, you have to get them, and because you can't have WhatsApp on that, and this you need to have WhatsApp. So it was like 10 years ago. There's been huge changes in the last 10 years, right? So life has changed in so many different ways now. Long distance. I mean, now in the pandemic, we all of us kept touch with our friends and relatives through video calling. But when my partner, he went abroad, there was no video calling between us.
Like that,
So
actually, that's one of the things I told my wife, right? Like whatever we could salvage or keep our relationship was through WhatsApp pictures and stuff like that. But I want to touch on a different aspect of what you had brought up earlier, right? Which was the career. And while I was prepping for this episode today, I came across this tweet someone put, and I think it's actually very apt, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah, so I'm just going to quote the tweet I read. It says, "It's always about working moms. No one says working dads. A woman has to figure out working after marriage, never a man. A working woman's life changes after having a kid, not a man's in terms of job. Married women aren't preferred for hiring due to the possibility of pregnancy." End quote. I just want to understand, like, is this something that you've experienced? Did you try going back to work post your son being born? And what was that? I mean, because this is really powerful, right? And this is somebody in 2022 writing it, which, from my experience, I think it's a fair assessment, right?
So that's a sad truth that even today, even now, we think that taking care of the home is primarily the woman's responsibility. So if you're a working woman, then, and a lot of women also say things like, often they say that feminism has created double the burden on us. Earlier we were just looking after the home, and now we're having to look after the home and the work, the professional work. But the fact is that this burden has been created by our culture, in which men are not encouraged to contribute or be equal participants in the home chores, or the duties of taking care of the home, right? Because if you're both working, and then both of you are taking care of the financial responsibilities, then both of you should also take care of the home responsibilities. Makes sense. But it doesn't happen, and we don't have a culture that encourages it. And I personally have experienced that my partner, he's very active in taking his share of the home responsibility. He becomes, uh, people joke about it, people would try to shame a man who actually tries to take responsibility at home. They would try to shame him for being a lesser mortal. Or one of my good friends actually made a comment upon this during the lockdown, when we were talking about how both of us are just getting killed by the fact that we're all managing the home responsibilities without the house helps and everything. And I said that I am, because I got COVID, and also he was taking care of everything, including the child, and I was just sitting, sleeping in my bed. So this friend says, "Oh, you have a very obedient husband," in the way that wives are obedient, right? Because a good wife is an obedient wife, so you have a very obedient husband. And that's very offensive, because if a man is actually doing what he's supposed to do, if you have a partner who's working, and you're supposed to take care of the home, and then you're getting shamed for it. So because of the this kind of mindset which is prevalent in our culture, so obviously employers are also uh, part of that same mindset. So they think that a woman who's working will obviously have to be the primary person taking care of the home. That's how it
Yeah,
is.
actually, I'm glad you said that. Right, two things I have to add is one is let's not get started on paternity leave. Nadir and I have done an entire episode on that, and I think that speaks a lot about corporate India. But the second thing is what you said, right? Brought to mind a story, a dad that we spoke to last year in June, and he narrated the story of how, because he decided after his twins were born to stay at home and take care of
Hmm.
them, and his wife would go to work. So automatically he became an anomaly in
Hmm.
Indian culture. But the second thing is, because he was doing it, and now among their friend circle, everyone started knowing that he was a dad who was taking care and doing stuff. When they met up at parties, his friends would take him in aside and say, can you not say this? Because the moment
Hmm.
we leave, all our wives are like, oh, look, he's doing it. Why can't you do? So it kind of flips, right? So for the man also, it's kind of that, oh, how can you do it? We end up having to do
There's a pressure on us to live up to those standards.
it.
Yeah, but I'm glad that there are men who are choosing to do this in spite of all the pressure that there is on men.
And speaking of pressures, we've spoken to so many people on the podcast. We've recorded over 120 episodes, and we keep having this discussion, debate, however you want to call it, that despite being in the information age today, with the way technology is building, and I can only speak from an India perspective, because there's enough and more data to kind of support it. um, there's a part in your book where you also write that the effects of patriarchy are very strong, especially when you become a mother. So it's both the sections who are kind of sort of fighting with each other, right? Women who are shaming other women or other parents, and but on the other side you
Yeah.
obviously have the men folk who are probably doing the same thing. And in your case, it's a very interesting case, because you've seen both sides, from a long distance relationship standpoint, managing a young child, at you also being at a very young age. Where do you see this? Like, do you see this changing, or have you seen that the change has already happened? People are now finally accepting it, understanding it, considering you've written this 10 years ago.
Certainly changing, certainly, but more so in big cities and metros, not so much in small towns. But of course, things are changing, but the pace of change is very slow in small towns, you know. And even educated people, and this the person who made this comment about me having an obedient husband is a very good friend of mine. He's a man, and see, men judging other men, it's what you talked about, you know, both ways, both sides. And he's very accomplished and everything, but the mindset, you know, is because it's years and years of conditioning. It takes a long time to die. But then yes, we do now of course have examples of men who are taking career breaks to stay back and become the primary parent. So at least we have those examples to quote. At least we have one person who's creating that pressure on all those other people, right? So that's a huge change. And yeah, 10 years ago you wouldn't even have heard of it.
Yeah, and one more thing I just want to add is in India we have this whole thing about, you know, education equals being progressive,
Yeah.
understanding, and things like that. And I think that's where we fail majorly, right? Like you can be somebody who's got like a PhD for all I care, but it doesn't change your mindset, right? Like education will only make you good. It doesn't make you a good person. It doesn't change your mindset. It only ensures that basically you know what's written in a book. That's
Yeah.
the way I've looked
Like
at
you
it.
say, you know, you can take the man out of the village, but you can't take the village out of the man.
Yeah, and you know what? That actually statement is much better when you say it in Hindi than English, right? But I have to ask. I mean, we've had a great conversation so far, but one of the things that while I was going through your book, and this comes from personal experience. That's why I want to first set context to it. Then I can ask you the question. Is when I was about 16 years old, I'm the eldest son of
Hmm.
three, and when I was about 16 years old, my mom was very slowly talking to me just about the whole situation around when I was born and stuff like that. And this is the mid 80s, right? So things were very different. Like we were talking about WhatsApp at that time, like email was something that people had never heard of back then. Like long distance calling was a huge deal.
Yeah, I
And this
know.
was,
Hello, hello, आवाज नहीं आ रही है.
yeah, exactly. And so my mom, when I was born, she was pregnant with me in the Middle East, right? And when she talked about just the same thing that you talked about, the loneliness
Hmm.
or just the pressure about being a parent and how everything she had to go through, right? And at that time when I was 16, I felt, because it was my mother, and for the first time my mother has expressed such feelings towards me and just telling me, and I was just like, wow. Like, there's one thing when they talk about mother's love, and then when you hear like the kind of thing your mother went through before you were born. And then my mom didn't do this just once, right? She had two more kids. So I was just like,
Yes, wow.
wow, like it's unbelievable, right? When I'm thinking now. But when I became a parent, right, that stuck with me and I looked at it so differently because as a parent, I could now relate far more.
Hmm.
So, which now kind of comes to my question. Would you be doing something similar, like how my mother did with your son? Would you be talking to your son about it? Uh, how would you like kind of break that down? Because like you kind of relate far more. Like that, I feel a certain way our relationship changed that day
Hmm.
because now I could actually understand there. And if I'm not mistaken, your son is about 10 or 11, so he's not too far
9,
away
yeah,
from
he's
that.
going to be 10, yeah.
Oh, he's 9. Okay, okay. So, or have you actually already started just dropping hints? I mean, considering the
So
book is out.
I mean, you have to consider the fact that he's living in a house where there are books titled "The Reluctant Mother" lying around, and there's been a huge grand launch in which everybody is talking about the reluctant mother, and he's sitting there. So you have to consider the fact that the question of breaking it to him has already we've already crossed that bridge. And because we've been having these conversations even with my relatives and cousins and friends, and because ever since the book has been launched, I think maximum conversations have been about this. And he's also listening to me having talking about the book in all these events and people asking these questions, and because everything is online now, so all of my women's day speeches and this and that, he's getting a great course in women's studies at the age of 9. So yeah, so then the interesting thing is sometimes, as you would say, the universe brings you these interesting coincidences which perhaps uh, would otherwise things would be difficult, but they make it easier. So what happened is, around the time that my book was launched and we were, the hype was building up and everything, two of my sisters in law, they had their babies. One of them had 6 months ago and the other one just like 2 3 months ago. And so when we would sit there and we would talk about my book, and both of them would then start talking about their own experiences as to how difficult it's been. It's like, oh my God, your book is absolutely relatable. And even though they hadn't read it by then, but just talking about the fact that it's so difficult and people don't allow you. And he would be sitting there and he would be listening to all of those things. And then my husband's brother came over and stayed with us, and he had a little girl, 5 6 months old. And because my son is really attached to her cousin and to his cousin and to his uncle, and he said, I'm going to sleep in their room. And the baby cried all night long. And he came to me in the morning and he's like, Mama, yeah, I totally get it, parenting is so hard. Because it's like, I totally get it. Parenting is just so hard. How would you have been managing with me staying up all night long? Wouldn't I cry like
That
that?
is so perceptive, right? Of him to actually, and that's a
He
great
is, yeah.
sign that he's picking up the right things, and hopefully that is going to shape his mind when he grows up. So very, very cool, very cool.
But thanks so much. I think that's a great note to end this Mother's Day special episode. Thank you so much, Zehra, for being just so honest and candid with us, right? We really appreciate it. Just sharing your thoughts.
So thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nader. It's been a
Thanks so
pleasure
much,
having
Zara.
this
Hopefully,
conversation.
more and more women will hopefully publish through different mediums about the experiences, and more people can learn and read about what parenting, motherhood, fatherhood is really all about, and it's just not one sided.
I think a lot of motherhood narratives are coming out these days, and this is something that has changed in the last 10 years. Because when I started writing, this was something which was totally unspeakable, and now there are so many books coming out which are talking about motherhood. So it's changing. The tide's changing in that sense, that at least we're having these conversations, and we are accepting the fact that a mother is a human being. It's not a goddess. It's just a person. There's a woman, there's a person inside the mother, and all of your needs and dreams and desires just don't go away because you have a child. You remain that same person, and there's an added dimension to you, not that it's just one dimension.
And that was Zehra Naqvi with her unfiltered chat with us about her experience as a mother. Honestly, Nader, I've never come across a raw account like this of a mother ever. And reading Zehra's book was really eye opening.
Her book and the conversation that we had with Zara right now. I mean, every individual parent knows what they are going through in their parenting life, and here is Zara, who's just left no stone unturned, and she's just come out and said that yes, this is what real parenting life is all about, and I think that's great. Kudos to somebody like Zara, who's putting out her life, her experiences for other people to probably connect with, and I really respect that. I really do. It was a great conversation, and we thank Zara for her unbridled confidence in talking to us about her parenting journey.
Right. That's all from us from this episode. As always, if you want to reach out to us, you can drop us an email at popsinapod@gmail.com, or you can reach us out on our website, popsinapod.in.
You can also search for us on social media. Just search for Pops in a Pod, and we'll be right there. Instagram, Facebook. You can look up Peter or myself on LinkedIn and Twitter as well. And yeah, we keep putting up content. And if you know of someone who would be interested in talking to us about their parenting journey, their relationship, their professional journey, please feel free to send them our way, and we'll be happy to chat with them. Until next time, thank you so much, and great Mother's Week, Mother's Day, Mother's Year.